I wish I was with you today, but today I'm traveling in Europe, ending my trip at one of your sister institutions, Emmanuel Christian University in Oradea, Romania. And I'm going to be spending some time with the business and economics faculty on this whole question that you're going to be talking about today, integrating one's faith with the demands of one's work. So have a great day, and I'm glad you're here.
Bill, from your perspective, what do you see as the need in the world today for management and leadership development? Is there a missing ingredient out there?
Sometimes I use those words, Al, interchangeably, management and leadership. So let me do that as I respond to that question. First of all, and as I respond today, I'm going to respond a lot to Peter Drucker. We'll talk quite a bit about Peter Drucker. I had the privilege of not only being benefited by his advice, but he was also a friend, a counselor, and a mentor. And one of the things he said about leadership is that leadership in and of itself is really not something to be sought after. Leadership is just a means. To what end is the real question? And the end of leadership is the people that follow and the direction they're going. And so in response to your question, it is really that point that if you're a leader, you're responsible for the people that follow and the direction they're going. Another thing Peter used to say is a leader has only one choice to make: to lead or mislead. And it's an awesome responsibility. And I think you could go into a bookstore today and you could get shelf upon shelf written about leadership. But not much is said about the awesome responsibility of leadership. And that gets really to the people that follow and what's happening to them under your leadership. And I think that's a point that needs to be emphasized, and then a point that also needs to be amplified so that people can understand how to fulfill that responsibility.
Sometimes I've heard you talk about management as a liberal art. Could you develop a little bit about what that really means, what that means to you, and how you see it playing out?
Sure, and again, I must refer to Peter because that was something that he penned. And in the process of doing that, he was recognizing that as we lead and manage in organizations, we don't lead and manage things. We lead and manage people. And therefore, if you want to be effective in leading and managing people, you need to seek and take some time to understand what makes up the human condition. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? How is our job affecting us in the kind of people we're becoming? Is it an additive or is it detractive, and why? As you probe that and begin to think about where the answers are typically, usually, in much of what we learn in a liberal arts curriculum, in our social sciences and humanities. And Peter would then go on to say that in order to understand the human condition, you need to also recognize that there's a spiritual dimension to the human condition. That's where character comes. And Drucker, in his own way, was raising the question of God, which is another whole subject, but it's something that's an important subject.
Wow. So you're saying then that management is more than manipulating toward the bottom line.
Yeah.
But it does involve caring for the people.
Right. You know, we often refer to management as getting the right things done through others, which it is. That's a very important part of it. But what's happening to the people that are getting the right things done?
Right.
And are they being developed as whole people? Are they really treated as the subject of work, not just the object of work? Not just a pair of hands, but someone who is actually becoming in a positive direction or a negative direction under your management and leadership.
How do you measure that in your bottom line?
Well, I think it's something that is measurable in results. And to that extent, if we're talking about that as a bottom line, I think there is a cooperative effort that has to produce a result, or it's a waste of time. So I think results are very important, and I have found that as you focus on the person and their development, they then pick up the importance of focusing on their colleagues and their development. So you end up building a team, and it can be a very effective team as far as producing results.
So there's a very fine line here between caring about the person and getting higher production and caring about the person so you can get higher production. How do you make that distinction?
Well, I think it is the problem, Al, that we sometimes get into when we set up a framework of either or. I look at it as something that has to be both and. I think Scripture calls us to be productive. So that all these gifts and talents that God has given us, we need to produce with those, not just to sit and admire them or cuddle with them, but to actually get things done. So I think they go together.
So you've mentioned Peter Drucker several times, and I'd like to explore a little bit more about him. Tell us a little bit more about your relationship with Peter Drucker and how that had an impact on you as a manager and as a leader.
Well, Peter's often referred to as the father of modern-day management. And during his lifetime, he wrote over 35 books on management. But he was also a connoisseur of art. He got his PhD in art, and especially focusing on Japanese art. So you know, he was a broad person as far as his mind is concerned. But he was also a person of faith. Some of my most interesting discussions with Peter was on questions of faith. And he was profoundly influenced by the writings of Soren Kierkegaard in his journey of faith and before he became a Christian. I'd like to read for a moment what he said about faith. I'm reading, Al, from Peter's little essay on the unfashionable Kierkegaard. And this is what Peter says about faith. Our human existence is possible as existence, not in despair, as existence not in tragedy, but as possible as existence in faith. Faith is a belief that in God the impossible is possible, that in Him time and eternity are one, that both life and death are meaningful. Faith is the knowledge that man is a creature, not autonomous, not the master, not the end, not the center, yet responsible and free. That's a profound statement.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
In what way do you think that view of God influenced the way he talked about management?
Well, it influenced how he viewed the person. It influenced the importance of focusing on the development of the person. So I think Peter was not, he was very quiet about his faith. You had to search it from him. But he also recognized that it was important to raise the question of God in the middle of work. And that's one of the reasons why he developed this whole concept of management as a liberal art. It was his way of raising the question of God, not only in work, but in this very secular academy that he lived in for most of his life.
Yeah. Would you share with us a few examples of what it means to care about people in a very real way in a business?
Yes, I can give you some examples, Al, about this whole issue and responsibility of raising the question of God, and then how it was played out, as well as touching about some of the things you asked earlier about leadership. First example I'll share with you is a practice we had in Service Master where when a person got a senior position over a large group of people in Service Master as a leader, manager, they typically would be given the opportunity to purchase some Service Master stock as part of that opportunity. And I can remember this one time where an individual got the news that he was promoted, and he was very thankful for it. He called me and he said, "Bill, we've talked to my wife about it. We're ready to move." They had kids. They had to move from the east to California. Big move for them. He said, "But there's only one thing that's bothering us. We don't know if we want to buy any more Service Master stock." So I said, "Well, you know, when will you be in town next?" "Well, I'll be in town next week." I said, "Well, let's sit down and talk about it." So we did. We had breakfast together. And he said, "You know, we might have to borrow some money to buy the stock, and we just don't feel comfortable about that." And I said, "Well, here, let's take this napkin and draw a little T account, your balance sheet, and see what's on it." And we went on to the asset side, and he had a couple of cars, they had a boat, they had a house, and they already had some Service Master stock. And then we went on the liability side, and he had a mortgage on his house. And then, you know, he had that net worth down there that balanced it all out. And he said, "That's it, Bill, right down there, that net worth." He said, "You know, if the stock goes down and we borrowed money, that goes down. We don't think our net worth is large enough at this point to do that. We've got kids we've got to put through college." And so I looked at him, I said, "Why haven't you put all your debts on your balance sheet?" He said, "Oh, Bill, I've been honest with you. I've told you everything that we owe." I said, "Well, let me ask you some questions. How many people are there in this unit that you're going to assume responsibility for?" He said, "Well, you know, I think it's about 800. I said, "A year from now, is there going to be room for 900 people in that unit or 700 people in that unit? Does your leadership have anything to do with that? How many of those people do you think are the principal breadwinners in their home?" "Well, maybe 60%, 65%. I said, "Are they going to get a raise next year? Or are they going to get a decrease in their salary? Does your leadership have anything to do with the answer to that question?" And then I got into the more softer subject. I said, you think any of these people in your unit have some difficulties in their marriage or some problems with their kids? Are they going to come and talk to you about it? Some of them may be even spiritual problems. Are they going to talk to you about it? Or is that just something you don't talk about in work? Or you sure don't talk about it to the boss? He's got nothing to contribute to it. Is your leadership going to have anything to do with the kind of people they're becoming, not only in the workplace, but in their home? And I said, you know, I could go on for the next half an hour and raise many other questions about your touching these people. But if you're telling me that all these questions are irrelevant, then you're also saying we don't need a leader. It's going to happen. Whatever happens is going to happen. But this gets back to a leader has only one choice to make, to lead or mislead.
Right.
And I said, you know, the responsibility you've assumed, what Max Dupree refers to as the posture of indebtedness you've assumed as a leader to the people, is much larger than anything you've put on your balance sheet. And if you don't want to assume that debt, that obligation to the people, don't take the job.
Did he take the job?
He took the job. And after a while, he thought about it and bought some Service Master stock, too.
That's a great illustration. You also, though, in addition to dealing with a management team, would have interactions with some of the people, even in the lowest part, so-called lowest part of the organization.
Yeah.
How did it affect your conversations?
Well, you know,
there?
I think my predecessors in Service Master, Ken Hansen and Ken Westner, both recruited me to come to the company. And as I came into Service Master, I came as a senior vice president. And they had my duties all laid out for me. The first 8 weeks of my job, I was out in the field doing the service work we did as a company. And little did I realize I didn't even understand what I was going to be asked to do when they said that. It was kind of a shock for me. And Ken Hansen said, "Don't worry about it. You'll be able to come in the evening and do your work as senior vice president." But it was identifying with the people at all levels of our organization. And it was right at that principle of never ask somebody to do something you're not willing to do yourself. And when you actually do the acts of service, you understand some of the opportunities, some of the challenges. For example, I can remember I was working in a hospital one day, and one of the things I realized when I was mopping floors in hospitals as part of the cleaning department, housekeeping department, was that you got rarely called your first name. It was, hey, you, come over here. Anyway, I was preparing to mop a hallway, and you had to put signs that's water and so for your mom. I got all my signs up. I'm mopping the floor, and a lady stops. She's walking by on the other side. She stops and looks at me, and she says, "Aren't you Bill Pollard?" And I looked at her. I didn't recognize right away. And I said, "Yes, I am." And then she identified who she was, and she was a shirt-tail relative of my wife. And then she leaned over a little closer to my ear, and she said, "Is everything all right at home?" And I said, "No, I have a new job." And then we laughed a little and talked about it. But it's again the perception. She wondered, "Are you no longer a lawyer?" Or she didn't know I started with service management. But in any event, so there's all those emotions and feelings as part of the job. And one of the things after that experience that I decided to do with the help of my senior team was to institute a process where everybody in Service Master, once a year, did our service work. Whether you're in the accounting department, the IT department, whether you're in operations, and it was a different service each year. And as I went out, I learned, every time I learned something about what we were asking or imposing or supporting or not supporting for that worker to get the job done.
How did that affect the attitude of the workers when they saw you doing this?
Well, sometimes, they usually were surprised. What are you doing out here? And I can remember one time when I did this for a week in a large manufacturing plant in Southern California, where we were having all kinds of problems implementing our services and getting productivity. We had to deal with a big union. And so one of the things I learned that week was that most of our workers in that plant, we paid every 2 weeks. Most of our workers didn't have a checking account. When they got their check, they went to a currency exchange and got ripped off for so much, so that was another deduction from their pay. A lot of them spent their grocery money at the front end of the 2-week period and all of it. So near the end of the period, we'd much better off if we could have paid them daily in cash. Mm-hmm. And we worked out a plan where we ultimately did that. So it was like a debit card that they had. It was just realizing the culture, the differences in some of the cultures they were coming from too. And the workplace was really the most stable element of their life, many of them. Mm. So when you introduce change in the workplace, it was double traumatic because of all of the change and difficulties that were going on in their home lives.
Mm. Very challenging. Sometimes as a leader, you have an idea that we ought to do it this way, but all of the management team won't go along with the idea. How do you deal with that kind of dissonance?
It's one thing to make a decision, it's another thing to implement it.
Right.
And if you don't have the troops with you, you will not implement it. So the reality is, until they're sold, it's not a decision. That's the reality of it all. Yeah. No matter how good you think it is. You got to bring them along, and sometimes that takes time, sometimes that takes dipping, and sometimes that takes changing what you think should have been done.
Yeah. Now, if we're going to talk about this subject in general, management education, even in a secular university, how can we develop some of these ideas for people that are not a part of the faith?
Well, one of the ways in which Peter encouraged me to do this, in a broader sense than just simply a Christian audience, was to raise question of the purpose of the business. Can the business firm produce goods and services, excel at serving the customers, make money, create wealth for shareholders, and also be a moral community for the development of human character? And I think that's a huge question in management today. It's a huge question as we're teaching management. It's a huge question as we've come through this last major economic downturn. I want to share experience with you that I had about 6 months ago with an investment banker in New York from a firm everybody would recognize if I mentioned the firm. And we were having lunch together, and he was complaining about all the new regulations and what was coming down the pike and what they were going to have to live with and implementing them. And I said, weren't you guys involved in packaging these mortgages and selling them and the way or something? Yeah, we were. And I said, did anybody in your firm ask the question, would they be a buyer of what they were selling? He just looked down the table. And I said, why? Why did one person raise that question? See, the only question that was raised was, get it packaged, get it sold, make the profit. And the fundamental question wasn't being raised, and it needs to be raised in any environment, certainly in a business environment. Is what you're making, is what you're selling something you would buy?
Yeah. It's interesting you put it that way, because that suggests that when you care about people, it's not only the employees and customers, but it's about what the product will do to those people.
It sure is, yeah.
Well, thanks for being a part of this. I know that we're going to be better because of your remarks, and I've just appreciated everything you've done over the years, and thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you, Al, and I'd like to close your time, or my remarks, with a passage from Scripture. I'm sure most of you are familiar with those words of Joshua in the closing days of his leadership. Let me just read them to you. From Joshua chapter 24. Now therefore, fear the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now that word serve in the Hebrew language also means worship. And it also means work. And that's about what you've been talking about today. How our work can be a worship to God as we serve others. Thanks for listening.